Our mission for week 6. Our mission for this week, if you agree to undertake it, is to discover what Paul intended to do when he penned the so-called pastoral letters. Paul writes from prison, but where? You must discover the answer to this question. He intended audiences where Timothy Welcome to our mission for week 6, reviewing the pastoral letters. Our mission for this week, if you agree to undertake it, is to discover what Paul intended to do when he penned the so-called pastoral letters. Paul writes from prison, but where? You must discover the answer to that question. He wrote to audiences where Timothy was in Ephesus and Titus was in Crete. The term pastoral letters was first coined in the 18th century. Why? Elwell, in his book, suggests 2 reasons. The letters focus on the pastoral concern for those addressed, and secondly, that all 3 deal with the pastoral care and the orderly conduct of the church before the watching world. Now, what phrase unites these books? Well, if you look at 1 Timothy 1:5, it says, "Here is a trustworthy statement that deserves full acceptance. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the worst." 1 Timothy 3:1, "Here's a trustworthy saying. Whoever aspires to be an overseer desires a noble task." 1 Timothy 4:9, "This is a trustworthy saying that deserves full acceptance." 2 Timothy 2:11, "Here's a trustworthy saying. If we died with him, we will also live with him." And Titus 3:8, "This is a trustworthy saying." I want you to stress these things so that those who have trusted in God may be careful to devote themselves to doing good. These things are excellent and profitable for everybody. So did you catch that phrase? This is a trustworthy saying. And so that helps to unite these 3 books. Now, our mission also requires that we discover the context behind 1 Timothy. What did Paul encourage Timothy to do in 1 Timothy 1:3? He says, stay there in Ephesus. Why did Timothy need to stay in Ephesus? Well, 1:3-7 shows there were false teachers in Ephesus that threatened the integrity and stability of the church. From 1:8-11, it appears false teachers were improperly interpreting the law, and Paul offers a correction for that false teaching. Paul seeks to encourage Timothy to press on as he reminds Timothy that he had once opposed the gospel. But God showed Paul mercy. Thus, there is hope in this difficult situation, and Timothy needs to stay faithful. In chapter 2, Paul reminds Timothy to focus on prayer and worship. Paul explains the high standards for officers in the body of Christ in chapter 3. Chapter 4 states that heresy can be avoided by clear teaching. And chapter 5 reminds Timothy to care for the widows and the elders. Chapter 6 reminds Christian slaves to be respectful to their Christian masters. And finally, Paul concludes the letter by offering final warnings and teachings. And final encouragement for Timothy, who needs to avoid the love of money and pursuit, and to pursue his calling regardless of the naysayers. Now, our mission also requires us to explore 2 Timothy's historical context. Paul writes to Timothy while in prison. His letter is designed to urge Timothy to stay faithful and to join him before the winter sets in. Obvious is the fact that much of 2 Timothy focuses on suffering. Paul gives thanks to Timothy's faith. He urges Timothy to join him in suffering for the gospel. Paul does not want Timothy to join him in prison, but to consider suffering when being faithful may have a high cost. Timothy needs to endure hardship as a good soldier to Jesus Christ, or like an athlete training, or even as a farmer. Paul offers much pastoral counsel to assist Timothy, which he is to pass on to the church at Ephesus. And Timothy needs to recognize that times are perilous as religious predators are ready to attack the unsuspecting church. These opponents can be overcome by an apostolic example and teaching the scriptures. Even if the audiences do not want to hear the gospel, Timothy is encouraged to preach the gospel anyway. And Paul shares greetings from Luke, who is the only friend Paul has with him, and tells Timothy what to do in preparation for his impending trip to join Paul. Timothy needs to bring Paul some personal effects along with John Mark. Our mission also requires us to unveil Titus's context. Titus is the shortest pastoral epistle. Its purpose is to give Titus practical advice until either Artemas or Tychicus arrived to help Titus. Paul wants Titus to join him for the winter at Nicopolis. Paul, having been with Titus at Crete, left him to organize the church. He reminds Titus of the high standards of church leadership and instructions on handling those who hate the Christian message. Paul shares that all age groups are to relate to one another so that the love of Christ is shown. Chapter 2, 1 through 16, he shares orders with the older men, older women, and the younger men. He offers counsel for Titus and for slaves. Titus's goal as a leader of the church on Crete is to protect the gospel from being maligned. Chapter 3 shows Paul urging submission to the rulers and authorities. The church is to behave in a benevolent attitude toward non-believers because God's grace was shown to them. My prayer is that our mission for this week allows us to capture the heart of the great pastor Paul the Apostle. He loves and cares for the churches the Lord allowed him to establish enough to set men in place to nourish and instruct them. Have you accepted the mission? What have you learned that I did not share with you this week? God bless you.